How's it going, everybody? It's Saturday. It is the Saturday after we just did the most recent Faceoff Interview Series, which went live on, was it Thursday evening, I want to say, which we just started back up again, where Tony Flo and I are reliving the careers of our community members and doing that one player at a time, as my cat would like to join us in doing that, apparently. But the most recent one, and kind of the reason why we're making this video here today, involved a couple offhanded comments that we, as hosts on the show, made about a particular player, which we thought, admittedly, were kind of relatively tame at the time, honestly. To be specific, I believe the comment in question was us insinuating that our guest would be unlucky to get an HQM card pack, which Tony has produced some of. If you haven't seen them, they're kind of cool. But anyway, our guest would be unlucky to get an HQM card pack that featured 3 cards of the same player. And that player, for reference, was somebody that spent most of their career in that kind of like LHL backup, RSL starter territory. So before I go any further, I want to first and foremost state that I would hope that it's obvious that we're not doing anything in these podcasts or these interviews to hurt anyone's feelings or make anybody upset. Right. And on behalf of the 3 of us that were on the most recent podcast, Tony, myself, and our guest, I would genuinely like to apologize to that aforementioned player. We bear no ill will towards him as a player or as a person. And we all acknowledge that we, took that a step too far and can absolutely see how that could be hurtful. I will say, we definitely ask questions that are meant to be provocative, that are meant to, elicit people saying things that, they truly believe, right? We want to get people's, hot takes, so to speak. But obviously there's a way to do that and to bring those forward without necessarily bringing other players down. So it's an important piece for us to consider, and for myself as one of the hosts of the show to remember going forward as well. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this video, not just to apologize to this person, but this player in particular did take the time to mention a few other points, which I think it is important for us as a community to consider. Now, I don't fully agree with all of them, I'll be honest, but as someone who would have been the culprit of many of the, we'll call them accusations that he's leveraging here, I do want to take the time to treat them seriously and respond accordingly to them. So I'll bring up the comment here that was left as a result of this, and you can see there's a lot here to go through. So starting at the top, this person said, "Is there a need to talk that much shit? All the clicky bullshit killed the community, not the people that weren't committed. The fact that grown adults feel the need to talk shit and bring someone completely uninvolved down is just the fucking perfect encapsulation of why this community died." Okay. So there's a couple things to unpack there, and I will start by first and foremost acknowledging that, yes, I can totally see how our comments were offensive, and I 100% stand by the previous apology that I just made and the acknowledgement that we went too far. Totally get it. You have every right to be upset about that. With that said, I will say, honestly, I don't really see where talking that much shit came from. I really only recall that one time in the video where we mentioned that person at all in any remotely negative fashion. They may have come up one other time when we were discussing some of our guests' RSL career, but none of that was mentioned in a negative way at all. In fact, we praised this person's play, in particular in the finals that our guest had been a part of. But anyway, I'm happy to be corrected on that if anyone has timestamps that I'm not remembering, but I can't recall anything else negative that we said there. So I'm not sure where that much shit came from. But I do generally agree with the sentiment that the cliques that formed throughout the community were definitely one of the many reasons why the community eventually saw its downfall, right? With that said, I think cliques are a pretty natural, social thing. It's a social phenomenon that happens in any close-knit community. And whether you take that online, offline, in person, whatever, you're going to find that that's going to happen. And expecting it not to happen, I do think is kind of naive, to put it bluntly. While it definitely would have helped us to avoid the natural exclusivity that kind of comes with those cliques, I think it's an unrealistic expectation to have that would have been the case. And I think it's I would hope that it's obvious for people that forced socialization and friendships like that don't work very often, especially when most of the people involved at the time that these things were going on in like 2013, 14, 15, 16, most of the people involved are high school age. And there's obvious reasons why taking a bunch of high schoolers and sticking them in a competitive environment and forcing them to hang out with each other isn't gonna work super well. There are definitely ways for people to be inclusive while still maintaining your friend groups and your cliques. There 100% there are ways to do that. But again, most of us weren't really mature enough back then to recognize that. And I will say I was definitely one of the older people in the community around 21, 22 when we had actually started playing. But most of the community was not. And you can certainly look back and say, oh, well, we should have done more. I should have done more. Other community leaders should have done more. But again, I think that's unrealistic. And I think, honestly, most people lack the social maturity to recognize or be able to do that sort of thing, maintain that inclusivity today, even now. And I'm not just referring to HQM players, right? Like in general, people struggle to be inclusive most of the time. And again, I don't think that there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with that. I think the important thing, obviously, is not being exclusive, and there's a fine line you got to walk there. But our comments around the lack of committed players, which was the final part that this person mentioned in this first statement here, we were really lamenting the number of limited people who took the game seriously enough to help it grow and to help the leagues grow, right? There were a lot of people that showed up just to play and have a good time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And given how badly the deck was kind of stacked against HQM from the start, though, given that, it's like a demo, has no developer interaction or support, we really needed a community that was going to be more committed to building up what we had if we ever wanted the game to grow further. And I think, again, it's fair to call this out as a reason why the community didn't last longer. I mean, we needed that. We didn't get it. It's fair to call out our community leaders, myself included, for not placing a larger emphasis on that at the time. So continuing on, the community wasn't inviting to newer players and frequently shit on anyone in the RSL/LHL void. I enjoyed my time playing with you guys, but I just always felt like an outsider, and I imagine I wasn't the only one that felt that way. I can say you're definitely not the only one who felt that way, right? We saw that a lot, and I'm sure most of the people that watched this video either felt that at some point or know people that did. And we've always had an issue when it came to interactions between players, in particular of different talent levels. And I say that because this is a competitive game, right? And these issues tended to manifest themselves most severely during the Pub Stars era, which I think this player was a part of some of that. I don't think they made it to the ranked pubs era, but for that initial Pub Stars time, I think they were still active for. But let's be honest. The reality is that any team-oriented game, in particular ones that are competitive and are 100% skill-based, right? There's nothing that the game is doing for you. Any game like that is going to breed toxicity. And we see that in any major online game. It was the case back in 2013 when the NA community started. It's the case in 2023, 10 years later, right? We just celebrated roughly the 10-year anniversary of the North American community for when the very first season of the HQML started. So it's a pretty cool milestone to reach. But in that 10-year time, I mean, look at League, look at CSGO, look at Valorant, look at any other Dota 2, any other major popular competitive online team-based game. They all have the same problems where there's a lot of toxicity there. And it's easy to look back and acknowledge that we should have tried to be better. But again, I think that's unrealistic given the circumstances at the time. The general age of everybody, the ability to be almost completely anonymous, right? You're anonymous by default behind your keyboard, but the game added an extra level of anonymity with the lack of accounts. So we have people aliasing all the time, showing up as random names in pubs and shit-talking people and not being able to connect back to who they really were. And again, most of the players are high school aged. So it's naive to expect a group of people like that in those circumstances that are now forced to see each other, the same people, over and over and over again in a competitive environment, it's naive to think that a dynamic like that wouldn't occur. It's just human nature. And was it a problem? Absolutely. Like, should we have tried to be better? Definitely. Like, not debating that at all. Was that actually a fixable problem in particular before it became too late? I really don't think that it was. And I don't think it's fair to look back and try to pretend that that's the case. Continuing on, the fact that the spacer channel existed is evidence of this. It used to be the community would come together and hang out on TeamSpeak, but once the spacer channel was added, it was rare to see any of the admins hanging out with the rest of the community. This created the clique I mentioned. Nowadays, we have the issue with Discord servers. There is no singular Discord server that is easily accessible for a new player attempting to get into the game. Hell, I have no idea what Discord server is even being used anymore. A few of you are still in denial about the effect that channel, referring to the spacer, had, but I know I stopped coming to the TeamSpeak as often once I realized I wasn't going to be included in that clique. As a teenager, I believed the issues were on me, as I had a tendency to be annoying. As an adult, I realized that regardless of how annoying I was, excluding another member of the community for this is incredibly immature. All right, so let's take a step back in time here for a second, because I know not everybody that watches this is going to know what the fuck we're talking about. But for those who weren't around back then, we used TeamSpeak. Discord wasn't out yet. And in TeamSpeak, in order to help categorize the different channels, there were these dummy channels that were called spacers. And they did something very similar to what you see in like categories in Discord, right? A lot of times you'll see in most servers, they tend to be like collapsible, right? You can press the little like caret button. You can like expand or collapse a group of voice channels. TeamSpeak was the same way, but categories were not an official implementation. So what you usually did was you created a spacer that was quite literally the space between different categories of channels, right? So you have like general pub voice chat channels, and then a spacer, and then you'd have maybe the 6 different team-based channels for the LHL, and then maybe another spacer, and then 6 more for the RSL, and you get the idea. So it was eventually discovered that you could actually still join these dummy channels, these spacers, and use them for voice chat without anyone seeing you were in there, because they required admin level permissions to join and admin level permissions to see if anybody was in there. So it's effectively like using a private Discord channel now that's only viewable by people with specific server roles, right? I know we do stuff like that on the HQM Discord with specific channels that are based on teams in a tournament, right? So if you're on Team A, you're not going to be able to see or join the channel for Team B. So that's kind of how it worked. But as this person mentions, once that discovery was made, people with the admin powers on TeamSpeak used to use them so that they could have private voice chats with their friends. And I was one of the people that did that and participated in that. And people complained a lot about that at the time because of the natural or implicit exclusivity that came with that. But I will openly admit to you now, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. And obviously I'm biased as one of the people that was part of that. So take my opinion for what it's worth. But I think the expectation that people should be forced into social environments is wrong. And I think it's ultimately going to be more harmful than it is good. There's a reason why, as an example, right? If you go out to dinner with your friends, there's a reason why you're not expected to sit at a table and socialize with other random people that are also there, right? Like that wouldn't make any sense. If somebody tried to force that on you, you'd probably leave and go find a different restaurant, right? You have the option as a person or a group to do those things if you want to. Like maybe you can go sit at the bar or something like that, but you're always afforded the option to enjoy a more private experience as well. Maybe instead of going out to dinner because you don't want to go sit at the bar, maybe you invite people over for dinner at your place. Doesn't mean you need to invite every single friend that you have or every single friend that your friends have. There's a line there, and I think that's acceptable. So if the spacer in this case, right, going back to this example that this person mentioned, if the spacer wasn't an option, people would have just moved to private Skype calls or their own private voice chat servers anyway. And this person acknowledges that with the acknowledgement of private Discord servers now. It's just a natural progression for friend groups that develop out of larger social settings like that to find their own spaces to be able to talk and just have fun with each other. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, I see and I understand the inherent exclusivity that comes with that. But I think there's also, you have to think of the people that are in that situation as well and not expect them to hang out with people that they don't necessarily want to always spend time with. And that's fine. And that's another component of it as well that I think is often overlooked, right? Is it's not that people never want to speak to anyone else when they're spending time in a private voice chat with somebody. It's just nice to have private time to talk with them sometimes. It's just like that. I don't know how else to describe that. So I'll respond to this in a similar way that I have so far in this video, right? Was the spacer a problem that prevented larger community engagement? Sure, definitely was. Should we have tried to be more inclusive? Definitely. And there are other avenues we could have explored to do that. Should we have forced people to stop being able to have private calls with their friends? I don't think so. And I think it would have happened naturally anyway somewhere else, whether it's the spacer or anything else. These days, because you specifically mentioned that you didn't even know if there was a central like Discord server or anything. These days, the HQM community Discord is the most central place that you'll find for the game. And the link to that is posted on the subreddit. It's been included in many of my Twitch streams and videos that I've done in the past as I've been trying to help kind of passively grow things a little bit more in hopes that something magical will happen, even though, let's be real, it probably won't. Beyond that, most of the friend groups ultimately moved on to create their own private Discords that they hang out in. And I could think of at least like 5 or 6 off the top of my head that spawned from social groups that formed through HQM. And I think that's a pretty cool thing. And I'm sure there are more that I'm not aware of. And I'll be open in saying that I'm in, I think 2 private Discords myself, neither of which I own or started, but 2 private Discords that are built around groups of people that met through HQM. Okay, it does hurt my feelings a bit to be just constantly shit on, hence why I voice these frustrations. I haven't had a conversation with any of you in years, and yet you're going to make fun of me. Honestly, why do you even feel the need to do that? This is precisely why I left the community in the first place. It's different if I was there shooting the shit, but I wasn't. If you can't see why this would hurt my feelings, then you read this comment and think, wow, he's just being soft. It was just a joke. Then you really have a complete lack of empathy. If that's your take, I suggest you grow up and try to put yourself in my shoes. Someone who never felt accepted by the community and gets made fun of in a video that has nothing to do with them. That's the scenario I hope that you can visualize. Okay, so again, I understand that the comments I referred to earlier were offensive. And I will again say that I'm sorry. We're all sorry. We definitely overstepped in the way that we did. With that said, I'm still not entirely sure where this constantly being shit on bit is coming from. If you're referring to other comments that aren't in this video that I'm not aware of, then, it is what it is. I have no issues with recognizing that I've made a mistake. So, point me in the right direction. If there's another comment I made in this video or a different video that you were offended by, let me know. And I'm happy to own up to that. Right. I do think this is kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit here. Cause nobody's really looking at you and saying, wow, you're being soft, or, it's just a joke, like take a step back. I haven't heard anybody say that. And I don't know of anybody that's trying to minimize, your feelings or the way you feel. And I would hope that, being able to at least see this or hear me talk about it will help validate that, because again, I understand where you're coming from. I understand that it was offensive, was never the goal, was never the point. I'm sorry. Wish we could take it back, but we can't. If I can make it up to you in some other way, let me know. I'm an adult now. I know there will be plenty of you that were in that clique making fun of me for this comment. Luckily, I'm in a really good place and don't need your validation anymore. I needed it when I was a teenager, but those years are long gone. Regardless, I wish you all the best. Hopefully, all of you are doing well in your lives. So again, I don't know anybody making fun of you for this. It does, again, feel like putting the cart before the horse here. Um, I You're valid in your opinions. Everybody is valid to feel the way that they feel after, any kind of comment about them or directed their way, right? Your emotions are always valid, and I don't think anybody here is going to try to tell you otherwise. Um, so at the end of the day, I am glad you brought a lot of this up. Obviously, we don't see eye to eye on everything you mentioned, but if there was ever a way back to, what we used to have with the HQM community, these are the types of problems that we would need to learn how to solve.